r/nosleep. Posted by u/cult_leisure. I watched the live face reveal of my favorite YouTuber. What I saw will always haunt me. I come from a small mining town in Arizona where there is not a lot to do except hike. It was a good but boring area to grow up. Our population was small with little to no crime. My father owned the quarry where a majority of the community's economic strength came from. He left me a sizable inheritance after he passed away. I bought a truck and a house out in the plains with a basketball court and a pool. That was the sole extent of my lavish spending, but it was all I needed. Unless you count pizza, I didn't have many vices to blow my fortune on. I've never been an avid partygoer, luckily. Like a lot of people my age, one indulgence I did have was watching YouTube. Urban exploration became a most searched category of mine from 2009 on. I became a subscriber of a content creator and urbex vlogger named Isolation Infinity. He kept himself anonymous and did not show his face. He used footage of the haunts he went into as captured by the body camera strapped to his chest. His voice's baritone became a signature element of the channel. He traveled all over the world and went into many chilling places. These included vacant hospitals, asylums, morgues, and train stations. He even stumbled upon a murder in progress once. A homeless man had stomped another transient to death in a farmhouse. He uploaded edited parts of it. This was a controversial decision. It almost resulted in a lifetime ban for him from the platform. The clips did help law enforcement later on, nonetheless. He was also arrested a few times for trespassing on famous estates. The Houdini mansion in Los Angeles was one of them, but none of his fans held this against him. We respected him for being willing to get into trouble with the law in pursuit of the next viral video. Late last year, Isolation Infinity announced he was going to have a live face reveal. It was only going to be for his patrons, those who gave money to his Patreon account. I contributed funds to it on a monthly basis. I viewed him as a pioneer of his entertainment niche and did not mind sparing a little change. He emailed me and told me I was one of a dozen allowed to attend the live event. He further stated it would be in a password-protected chat room. He also promised an exclusive video which would not make it onto the public video lineup. I was more interested in the latter than the former. I never cared what his appearance was since I already had a vision of someone my age, in their mid to late 20s. It was hard to convince me he looked any different from the picture in my mind's eye. Still, I was not going to turn down the chance to find out. Being able to brag to his die-hard followers who did not get to experience it would be worth it alone. The night of the scheduled face reveal, I booted up my PC. I kicked back on a lounge chair in the second-story room of my house, which was my entertainment space. It was complete with video game consoles and my beloved Alienware computer. An open bag of pepper jerky and a bottle of ginger ale sat next to my keyboard. I went into my email. The password was in my inbox. I followed the link. It led me to the video of a room with nothing in it but a red wall with a baby blue frame. The caption "Isolation Infinity" will be on shortly rested at the bottom of the screen. I expected a home studio and instead got what appeared to be someone's dingy basement in need of a new coat of paint. What bothered me the most was the sound of heavy machinery whirring in the background. I wrote it off as bad plumbing. A man came into the frame. He was slim and wore a trench coat with maroon buttons on its front. He reached down, grabbed the lens of the camera, and shifted it upward. The familiar voice we had all grown fond of started to count down. "Are you ready to see who I am?" Isolation Infinity asked. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 5, he hoisted it upwards and pointed it at his face. I froze. He looked nothing like what I had visualized. He was hairless, emaciated, pale, and had marble black eyes. He reminded me of Werner Krauss from the old German 1920 film The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. His mouth hung open and tilted to the side as if he could not control the movement of his jaw. The most alarming thing to me was not how his features were not flattering. That explained why he valued being off camera for most of his career. What upset me the most in the beginning was how the disparity in his perceived age made me feel lied to. He always told his fans he was a young man, like most of his demographic. The individual before me on the screen was in his 50s at the earliest. "I have been fantasizing about broadcasting this for a long time," he said as he licked his lips. "You have made this possible, and so I need to show my appreciation by giving thanks in the most sincere way I know how." He moved the camera to the left and I could not believe what I saw. A woman in her 30s sat on a grimy floor, her head down from evident exhaustion. Rusted chain circled her arms. She wore a tattered black top, as though someone's knife or nails had left wounds on portions of her torso. Stains were on her clothes. She had spent time in the dirt fighting someone or clawing her way out of a soiled embankment before this. "Say something," he ordered her. "Tell them you can't wait, die." The blades of a chainsaw came into view and its motor revved. She whimpered with pain, and when she tried to murmur something I saw blood drip from her mouth. I dragged the mouse cursor over to the right-hand side of the screen to see how many people were in the chat. The answer I received left me weak. No one else was there but me. The others had either left or were never there to begin with, and I was too stupid to notice until then. My heartbeat increased as I tried to close the window out. I could not. The X symbol on the right-hand side was visible but useless. It was like every virus-infected pop-up ad you could not escape from. "What?" Infinity Isolation asked. "You don't like it, Mark? Everything I do is to make my most devoted subscribers happy." A chill ran through me. He knew my name. It took me a second to realize he had gotten it through my membership to his Patreon. The fact that he was aware of how I was his only viewer worried me. Was I going to be the sole witness to a barbaric act of murder? "Calm down," I reassured myself. "This is an elaborate prank he's recording right now. He's wearing scary Hollywood makeup and she's an actress. This is all for the sake of getting more views. The chainsaw has to be a prop bought off Etsy.com." Still, my hand inched towards the phone to call 911. The way the woman expressed her misery in the moment was all too convincing. I held my device closer to my ear. "I wouldn't do that if I was you, Mark." He stared right at the screen for a moment, his eyes making perfect contact with mine. "Can he see me?" He lifted the chainsaw above the woman's head. He brought it down with a noise from his throat which sounded like a cross between a scream and a laugh. A fountain of gore spurted out. The lens got hit with crimson bubbles. He cackled as I unplugged my computer. I carried it downstairs to my car, and drove to the nearest police station. I filled out an incident report in an office with a dying lamp and the scowl of a detective facing me. He looked as though he would have rather been anywhere else but at work. For the first 2 hours there, I had to convince them that I was not a crazy person. They thought I was there to waste their time with a fanciful tale of my correspondence with some creep. "I hope it was all a hoax," I said. "If this is not real, no one would be happier about it than me. Here's my computer. See if you can't trace where he's at in case it..." I gagged before I could complete my thought. The idea of it being authentic was overwhelming. They had cybercrimes go over everything, and a few days later I got my PC back. It took about a week before I received a call from someone working the case. She was a homicide investigator named Samantha Brown. "We found the killer was streaming from a bunker in Virginia," she said. "It's an old fallout shelter abandoned since the Cold War. He calls himself the I-73 Butcher, since that highway is his preferred route. He uses it as a screen name on the dark web." "Infinity Isolation is a serial killer?" I asked, feeling a knot in my stomach. "No," she said. "The real Isolation Infinity is someone else. This maniac poses as famous people. He uses a combination of tools, including voice-altering software and encrypted Wi-Fi. He hacks into their accounts. He gets a thrill out of making complete strangers watch his acts of terror. His tech-savvy ways also allows him to control other people's webcams, and we don't know how many he has breached. He is on several most wanted lists of different agencies. We have never found out what he looks like. The faces he uses on those terrible live streams are prosthetic. He has maintained stringent anonymity and avoided the news cycle. I'm sorry you saw such torment. The good part is you turning in your computer helped us at least find out his last known whereabouts. The scene's searched and we have some evidence. He's still out there somewhere? For now." I went to bed that night with a host of emotions. I felt violated by a complete monster that sabotaged my privacy. Moreover, I felt dumb for getting swindled. I still feel shivers over the fact that he is not apprehended. Word of what happened got to the real Isolation Infinity, who has as of late deleted his entire channel. Many speculated on how victims mistaking him for an insane person perturbed him. Sometimes, as I lay my head down and drift off to sleep, I hear a noise by my window. I jump up and think it is a chainsaw. Thus far, it has been a neighbor's lawnmower every time. I hope it stays that way. End. There are Wikipedia entries on the dark web. I found an article about my life there. You have Googled yourself at some point or another. Admit it. There's nothing shameful about it. It's not worse than what I did. I searched my name on the dark web. Don't ever make that same mistake. I was 19 years old then. Liv, my girlfriend, and her family were kind enough to let me live in their guest bedroom at the start of that year. They liked the fact that I could fix most of their computer problems. Liv is a great person, and what she saw in a hacker who could never survive for long in the 9-to-5 world is beyond me. Their house was in a suburb only a few blocks away from a library and coffee shops with free Wi-Fi. These locations were convenient for my burgeoning career as a digital outlaw. I used those resources until I was able to move out and get a small apartment of my own. After a string of demeaning jobs and abusive bosses, I found financial independence. I did this after I learned how to buy and sell things I shouldn't have with the use of my Tor browser. I engaged in illegal transactions such as ordering counterfeit money and stolen IDs. I discovered there was a large market for manufactured psychedelics. I often went to the skate park to sell those items off the nethermost landscape of the World Wide Web. Business was good. A young man with years spent in foster care, I sought out activities which gave me a sense of control. A childhood of not having any will do that to you. The ability to navigate the online world to get almost whatever I wanted afforded me a sense of power. It was all going well until one evening in July. I sat on the second level of a Barnes & Noble bookstore in a corner next to the self-help section. I always did my best work there. The place was starting to go under and I did not have to worry about an influx of patrons. Despite having a disguised IP address, I never wanted to risk a raid at home. The items were always shipped to a P.O. box instead of my unit number as well. In retrospect, these were all flimsy safety measures. They still gave me a sense of comfort, even if they were a tad delusional. I made sure there were not any cameras mounted near where I sat. It was a small space out of the way of the general public. Hiding in plain sight was always my preferred method. I drank strong coffee out of an oversized styrofoam cup. After 15 minutes of searching, I grew bored. I typed in my name, Joshua Wells. An input of my identity on that part of the web should be an indicator of how successful and arrogant I had become. I did not expect Wikipedia to be among the results, but it was the third link down. The first one involved a ghost tour in New Jersey. The guide had a similar name. The second was a gore website I was not interested in. While I may have been a thrill seeker, I was not out to consume media which capitalized on hurting others. I clicked on the third article link because of the title. It was about a television show. It read The Short Life of Joshua Wells. At first the title did not startle me, since there are plenty of others with the same name. Recaps of 10 episodes were on the page. The first paragraph illustrated how the series did not continue past season 1. I read the summary of the first episode for the sake of passing time. Episode 1, Joshua's father is a known and feared gang member. His mother is a helpless addict. She attempts to use their own son as a drug mule on a plane flight from Boston to California. She has hopes of making a profit by dealing narcotics to a major criminal enterprise on landing. The authorities intercept them. Their son goes with CPS. He goes to a safe harbor for kids. The synopsis struck me as very close to home. Who wrote or directed the show was not listed, but it did state the air date. The month and year given matched the era when an identical set of circumstances had befallen me. The name of the center I went to was even called Safe Harbor. I was too young to remember much, but the facts were precise. I gulped and tried to shrug it off as an unusual coincidence. I read the second episode summary. Episode 2, we follow Joshua on his 15th birthday. He goes to a juvenile detention facility for the first time after he attacks a teacher by throwing a desk at him. Although he missed, the instructor still presses charges since he did not like the student much. He befriends a troublemaker on the inside named Ian. They escape, but not before a massive brawl with the other teens ensue inside of the facility. It ends with the two captured. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. It was uncanny to me how similar the events were to my own experiences. A slight dizziness overtook me, but I went on to the third, unable to keep my eyes from skimming. Episode 3, Joshua is free. Joshua decides to break and enter an old man's upper-class home after scouting the place for days. His goal is to take the many Rolex watches from the top drawer of the old man's dresser. When he enters the house, Joshua discovers how the owner did not take his vacation cruise trip as planned. The man was asleep in his bedroom until Joshua wakes the victim by accident. Joshua runs away. He gets chased by the homeowner outside, where the elderly male dies of a heart attack in the street. I felt my chest tighten. It was all true, but I had never shared that story with anyone before. It was one of my most guilt-ridden memories. I read the next two. Episode 4, Joshua has nightmares of the old man crawling out of a ditch and choking him to death. He complains about night terrors to one of his counselors, who recommended a doctor. He ends up selling anti-anxiety pills after he does not like the way they make him feel. A girl he asks out overdoses and goes to the hospital. While she survives, he feels terrible, but not enough to stop dealing. He takes his earnings and buys a PC. He takes lessons on how to breach other people's privacy from a group of credit card thieves he met in a mall. Episode 5, Joshua discovers the dark web. He uses it to hustle low-level street drugs at first. He later reads headlines about some of his accomplices getting arrested. He still continues to engage in illicit activity. I looked at the air date for episode 6. It was the 24-hour period I was living through. Episode 6, Joshua goes into a bookstore to poach their internet and to try and make some money. He does not realize there is a man with a shaved head and a Carhartt t-shirt below him perusing the sci-fi aisle. The stranger is actually an undercover FBI agent. The government worker has a microphone and camera attached beneath his shirt. He is surveying for the perpetrator, even though he has not singled out who he is looking for yet. An arrest commences where they tackle, punch, and taser Joshua. They place him in handcuffs. My hands shook. I stood, gripped an Eckhart Tolle volume to appear less conspicuous and opened it. I leaned my head over the railing to stare at the ground floor below me. A man who matched the description given by the article was there. His shirt was baggy and hid what I knew to be a gun on his hip. He held a paperback in his hands. I pulled out my phone. I pretended to have a conversation with an imaginary business associate about stocks. I folded the laptop with my free hand and went down the escalator. I strolled towards the back where there were stacks of hardcover tomes on history. I found an unsecured door and walked through it. I was in the warehouse. Unopened boxes were stacked all around. I did not spot any workers and made a run for a rear entrance. I sprinted down a wide alleyway between the building and rows of motels. I passed an art gallery and liquor store before my heartbeat slowed. Along the way, I found a closed vegan restaurant called Belendi's Eatery. The place was black on the inside but its neon sign still glowed. A picnic table sat on the lawn out front. I stationed myself there. I opened the laptop again and connected to their free Wi-Fi without issue. I scanned the rest of the chronology. The remaining episodes were all future time periods. I wiped perspiration away from my forehead as I read the rundown of the next episode. Episode 7, labeled a dark net market operator in the media, 3 of the 7 charges thrown at him lead to convictions. This includes conspiracy to traffic narcotics. He gets out early after he agrees to cooperate with different agencies. He becomes a consultant for cybersecurity awareness and a social engineering expert. Following a keynote speech given out of town, he comes home. His girlfriend Olivia and her family have been murdered. My eyes strained and I felt my breath grow shallower. Episode 8, Joshua navigates her house. The walls had dried blood. Every corner's vandalized. Olivia's throat is slit. Her body is over the couch in the living area. Her parents had socks stuffed in their mouths and deep stab wounds on their stomachs. Joshua calls the police. He's treated as the #1 suspect in the media for days on end. He is finally cleared, but the psychological damage is too much to bear. I pondered the words. Though I was still young, it is true that Liv meant everything to me. Episode 9, Joshua goes to a psychiatric ward. He stares at the padded walls as though they will converse with him. Detectives do visit him with the hopes of gleaning some kind of further information. They tell him they know the aftermath of the massacre he stumbled upon was the work of an active serial killer. The murderer has remained unidentified. Episode 10, Joshua leaps out the window. He breaks his ankle. An adrenaline dump allows him to move across the field and onto the nearest highway. He goes out into traffic. A long-haul truck careens around him and takes out a line of vehicles. He goes to the nearest lake, where he weighs his own pockets down with stones. He waits until nightfall, and walks out into the abyss. The last image we see is his hand breaking the surface of the water. Starlight glints on his skin before his fingers submerge below the surface. His last few swallows of water create pockets of bubbles which rise to the top. I absorbed what the rest of my existence would look like. 4 black SUVs pull up and circle around me in the parking lot. Men in black suits, and the undercover agent from the bookstore, ran at me. Even though I did not resist, they still threw me to the ground. They dislocated my shoulder and kicked me in the jaw a handful of times before they cuffed me. I did get time reduced in prison after I agreed to cooperate to catch people like me. After my release date, I have tried to revisit that link without luck. I fail to understand how that article existed in the first place. I have read how high-level stress can open up insights and portals into the unknown. I would bank on the latter, though sometimes I think it isn't for me to know. I do not want to give in to what destiny has written for me. My escape from the bookstore has given me confidence that I can change the outcome of the dark web's prophecy. Even if only for a little while. Or did I only extend the inevitable for a fraction of time? Fate, especially in regards to our stories as individuals, is not written in stone. It is malleable, I tell myself. This positive thought is the only thing which keeps me going. I should visit Liv's house now. She has not answered my texts all morning. And I am a behavioral analyst with the FBI. I will never forget the case of the quicksand serial killer. I drove towards the farmhouse. I parked my black Honda near the cobblestone pathway. The plains of Arizona surrounded me. The concourse led to a front triangle-shaped entrance. I hopped out. The place ended up on our radar thanks to a hiker. He heard screams from the walls as he passed by the place earlier in the afternoon. The man's complaint was the 26th noise complaint of a similar nature within the last month. It finally led to the issue of a search warrant. I approached a lower-ranked uniform. He stood behind a line of caution tape and had a scowl as I neared his vicinity. "Who are you?" he asked. "FBI Agent Elizabeth Paulson," I said while I flashed him my credentials and the gold of my FBI badge. He stepped to the side. I walked in. The place was clean. I expected most crime scenes to have the repugnant stench of rotted flesh. The killer was tidy. The main foyer had trophies of deer heads hung on the mantel above the main elevator which led to the second story. To my right I saw a doorway with a set of steps past its threshold. These went down to a subterranean level. One of the homicide investigators looked at me. I approached her and extended a hand. She shook it and I introduced myself. She gave her title and name as lead investigator Samantha Brown. "Who is the subject?" "Eric Segerson," Brown said as she handed me a photocopy of the man's ID. He was born in Cleveland but moved to the West Coast with his parents when he was 5. His childhood was not normal ever since his mother and father divorced. He did go on to do well in school, and was even accepted into the University of Berkeley before a DUI got him kicked out. The charges in that case were later dropped. Fear and intimidation towards the young victim was the reason. He only has 3 arrests on his record. One was for shoplifting a set of knives at a sporting goods store. The second was for stalking and harassment of a co-ed after his expulsion. The third was for the night he got behind the wheel after drinking. "How many bodies have you recovered?" I asked. 4, Brown said. They were sunken. This surprised me. We found the entire floor of the basement as something resembling a thin quicksand. Its depths exceed that of 8 swimming pools. The viscous density will usually only allow you to sink to the halfway mark of your torso. "The movies lied to me," one of her subordinates said as he passed by with a clipboard clutched under his arm. "The artificial kind he constructed allows for full immersion," Brown said. "This is unlike the sort you would find along riverbanks or in marshes. We are still trying to find out if it's the thin density which drowns his victims. It liquefies upon contact with the heat of human skin. Or it could be something poisonous within the makeshift sand itself. We have scientific researchers on their way here now to give us answers. All we know is the killer has a lifelong love of chemistry." "Do the victims have commonalities?" "We have found 2 males and 2 females. He liked to target couples." "Where is he? I need to speak to him." "The boys are watching him in the greenhouse around back." I nodded and made my way to the rear entrance. I stepped outside and saw the glass and galvanized steel structure. When I peered into the humid conservatory I saw rows of marijuana plants. 4 cops circled the detainee with guns drawn in the center of the house. I went inside and a boot landed on his jaw. While he was an evil man, he was also defenseless in handcuffs. He would not have been any use to me as an interview if a concussion made him unaware of his surroundings. "I won't report any of you to your watch commander if you back down now," I said as I showed them my badge. A few looked at me with disdain and shock. Others gave me expressions of contempt. They all took a few steps back. "Give me some time alone," I said. They looked at each other with unease before their corporal waved them out. The officer still stared at me through the glass once he stood by the exterior of the greenhouse. I approached Segerson. He was thin and pale-skinned. He had a full head of brunette hair and blue eyes. He was 6 feet tall and I could see why he had no problem passing for a normal person up to this point. "I've already helped you out," I said. "Eric, it's time for you to do the same for me. I need to know the reasoning for your choices in regards to who we found in your basement." He grunted and kept his head low. "Let me ask you a few things. I received an email during my drive here about the laboratory in your bedroom. The quicksand-like substance found in your murders intrigues me. I need to know where the choice of the unusual weapon came from. Why did you target an equal balance of men and women?" "I liked hunting couples," he said as he met my gaze. My favorite thing to do was form the texture of the sand so they would sink slow. As they struggled to claw their way out, I would lie and tell them over a loudspeaker how they could survive. All they had to do was converse about a disagreement within their relationship. He cocked his head back and started to laugh. Tears streamed down his face. The body language used when they argued made them sink deeper, he said with another cackle. The kicker is how none of the couples ever failed to find something which nagged at them. These louts act as happy couples on social media while bickering behind closed doors. I put them in touch with who they are before they went under. How did you kidnap these people and bring them here? I asked. It couldn't have been easy. Most killers go after women when they are alone. That's right, he said with noticeable pride as his chest puffed out. I never went strictly for the easy prey. I always wanted a challenge. I scouted out who the man of the house was and what he did for a living. If he seemed rough and tumble, that made it even better. Your wife Amanda is tough. I know about her background as a Kempo instructor. You two would be prime selections for me. A wave of nausea overcame me. How did he know that? Segerson rammed his forehead into my face. I felt my nose break as he struck his shoulder under my jaw and pushed me down. His strength overwhelmed me. A stream of red flowed onto my top. He stepped over me as the cops swarmed in. They entered with their pistols drawn. I looked over and saw Segerson kick a box off the wall. It looked to be nothing more than an electrical junction. He raised his foot again and hit a switch. The floor unfolded and broke in half underneath us. The trap he had set consumed us. A gelatinous liquid flowed out from the sides and drenched us. It stank of old honey and algae. The officers started to slip as a few squeezed their triggers, but all missed Segerson. The killer leapt onto a miniature platform which held the greenery. He ducked for cover behind a thick row of plants. I grabbed the platform in time before my entire body could sink. My knuckles turned white as I brought my other arm onto the platform and held on. The silt wanted to take me into its abyss. I looked over and watched the team of law enforcement in their last moments of life. They choked, screamed and gargled as the fluid went into their lungs. A few circled in the morass, futile attempts to use their elbows to lunge upwards. One tried to hold his breath, a last desperate attempt to survive. The earthen and wet sediment mixture swallowed him. The corporal screamed and stared at the sky before his face became blanketed in the muddle. A gag was the last noise he ever made. I stared up and watched as Segerson loomed over me on the platform. He lifted his boot and stomped on my fingers. A wave of adrenaline overcame me and helped mask the pain a little. I was still in agony and knew I could not afford to let go. Die bitch, he said as he brought his foot down again. I'll find your wife and make her look at her own dismembered body parts while I tell her what I did to you. He ground the bottom of his foot onto my fingers as though he was squashing an insect. He lifted his leg again to kick me in the face. I knew there was no holding on after that if he knocked me out. A gunshot rang in the air. Red blossomed on his chest as he fell back. The quicksand he had made took him in his pathetic entirety. I craned my neck around and saw Samantha Brown with a Glock in her hand. The sheriff's office helped me get out of the quagmire with the use of rope attached to one of their cars. They called the paramedics to take a look at me. I had a fractured hand, nose, and countless scratches on my skin. It would be a long recovery, but I owed the ability to pursue it to the detective who saved my life. She is still on administrative leave right now. As soon as she is able to receive calls at the station again, I will reach out to her to give a formal word of appreciation. Segerson's attic held a plethora of documents, journals and scrapbooks. He had personal information on plenty of people who were still alive. There were copious notes on those he intended to track down, torture or kill. My lovely wife, Amanda, was in that pile. He had studied the Bureau and various other agencies he thought might be onto him. He attempted to dismantle them before they were on his trail. I am thankful we were faster. He also left behind maps. We found other quicksand locations using them as a reference. Bodies were in the Sonoran, the Great Basin, and the Chihuahuan Desert. His modus operandi was unlike any other I have seen, let alone heard of, since. The problem with the unusual ones is they paved the way for copycats. Let us hope no one derives inspiration from him. The end. I saved a young woman's life. I should have let her die. The firefighting squad I am a part of began our 96-hour break. We did one of two things after a 5-day tour. The responsible ones went home to be with their families. The rest of us made our way to a bar called Ashling's, the hangout spot for my department. We all deserved to decompress. I did not feel guilty about it. I knew the rest of my free time would focus on my wife, Grace, and child, Anna. Grace made plans of us going to the aquarium before May was over. We went there every other month, and while I found the trip boring, they always seemed to find it fun. Although some of the guys did get drunk within a half hour of us being at Ashling's, most were too tired to party till dawn. Instead we played darts, watched the fight on ESPN, ate some greasy food, and enjoyed pints of Guinness. I was ready to crawl into bed and go to sleep after 3 ales. I ordered an Uber and stepped out to wait for it. I peered up the road to look for my ride home. A woman in a sleek beige jacket walked by, and she was 19 or 20 years of age. She had earbuds in, kept her head down and seemed to mind her own business. A silver Camry skidded around the corner and onto the sidewalk. It headed for us. I pushed her into the doorway of the pub. We fell together into the front hallway as the car missed us by millimeters. The Camry crashed into a parked vehicle outside. The next-door coffee shop's windows shattered. Yells and frantic voices speaking into their cell phones bombarded the street. I stood and brushed the tops of my pant legs. I helped the young lady stand. The rest of the crew swarmed outside to see if there were any victims of the accident they could assist. It turned out the only person injured was the driver. The airbag rendered him unconscious upon impact and left his nose broken. He was about to get charged with his third DUI in under 2 years once the police arrived. As the sirens blared out onto the boulevard, I turned to the lady and asked her if she was all right. "I'm fine," she said before her eyes locked onto mine. "I owe you everything. What you've done needs my devotion." "No," I said with a nervous laugh. "I did what was right. I'm thankful I saw the lunatic barreling towards us." She did not take her gaze off me as she said, "I can't repay you enough. You've become the best part of my life. You saved me. You should sit down. The cops will want witness statements from us." "The name's Vivian." "Nice to meet you. My name." "I'll find out what they call you," she said as she seated herself at one of the tables. Vivian refused to fill out a voluntary form. The lead investigator saw how I was still a little tipsy. He stated my having drank would render my recounting inadmissible in court. It did not matter. A nearby gas station's camera on the street corner captured everything. The effect of the alcohol wore off the longer I talked with the first responders. My Uber ditched me after the driver saw reams of caution tape and emergency uniforms. I chose to drive home after a stretch of time. As I walked towards the adjacent parking lot, I heard Vivian's voice behind me. "I'll see you around," she said. "You're my savior." I gave a nod of awkward tacit approval. I was not sure how to take her compliment. I was back at the job. I forgot about the young woman. Even an incident like that gets shoved into the back of your mind. The inevitable desensitization one experiences in the field makes it so. What is chaotic to the average person becomes normal to individuals in my industry. We all left it as an unspoken memory. In fact, we encouraged each other not to discuss it. Many of us had boozing habits, and we did not want the top brass to find out how we celebrated our Fridays. The truck needed cleaning. I used a squeegee on the windshield as one of my co-workers mopped the floor. It was 9 a.m. and our garage door was open. The highway next to us bathed in sunlight. I saw someone approach the station. I looked to my left and took notice of Vivian. She walked towards me. She wore a yellow sundress and had a golden bow in her hair. She held something in her arms. As she got closer I saw it was a box of chocolates. Vivian handed them to me as I gazed at her with disbelief. She smiled. "This is for what you did 4 days ago," she said. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." "Well, it's nice when a civilian reaches out. I'm sure the boys will appreciate the treats as well." "We should meet up for dinner on Tuesday at 4 o'clock, she said with a wink. "Ashling's will be as good a place as any. I know you won't be working then. I'll buy you beer and dinner. There's also a movie I've been meaning to see. I rented it on Amazon Prime a while ago, but I haven't had anyone to watch it with. My place is near the college." "Listen, miss," I said as I took a step back, "I'm flattered. I'm also married with a kid. My woman wouldn't like that idea. Even if I was single, I'm a decade older than you." "I'm divorced and all alone," my buddy said with the mop still in his hand as he flashed a grin at her. I turned around and shushed him before I refocused my attention on her. "I'm grateful you weren't hurt that night," I said. "Plus, thank you for paying your taxes and making my job possible. We can't see each other though." Her expression changed. She stuck out her bottom lip and tilted her head to the side. She turned her back to me for a few seconds. She faced my direction again as her entire demeanor shifted into a sulking one. "You don't want to spend time with me?" Vivian asked with a tremble in her voice. "No offense, I said as I raised my ring-adorned hand, but no. I figured since Grace is gone in the evenings for her job at the clinic, it wouldn't be a problem for us to be together that day. You will change your mind. Vivian whipped around and made her way to the road. She disappeared around the corner. You need to tell me about your side pieces, my coworker said with a nudge. I punched him in the arm and told him to get back to his tasks. As I brushed aside his bad comment, one concern lingered in my head. How did she know my wife's schedule, let alone her name? You need a restraining order ASAP, Detective Palmer told me over the phone. I was in my living room. The man on the other end had been a friend of mine since the fire academy. Contrary to popular belief, cops and firefighters can help one another. Of course, we still insulted each other with reckless abandon. My 16-month-old child, Anna, was asleep upstairs. Grace left for the medical facility minutes before to clock in. I did not tell her about my encounter because I did not want her to worry. Why? I asked. I looked up her name. I pulled the report submitted from the night you prevented her from becoming roadkill. Vivian DeLuca. She has broken the stalking statute twice. She made 2 different grown men fear for their safety to the point where they reported her. She has brandished sharp objects at them and threatened injury. She has broken and entered into their homes. One of the craziest parts is, none of the guys she's done this to have even been romantic with her. They were all unrequited, since they did not speak with her for any length of time. One was a professor at the community college who taught a medieval studies class. She was one of his students. The second was a grocery store clerk she became enamored with. A clinical psychiatrist diagnosed her with something called OLD. It stands for obsessive love disorder. That's a real thing? I asked. Bet your money it is. Fuse that with a side of crazy and a propensity towards violence, and you get someone like her. She was charged with attempted arson on the first guy's apartment. She went into his place with a gasoline canister as he was sleeping. A public defender made a successful argument in her defense, so it never stuck. It helped her that the judge was on the brink of retirement and senile. Anyways, if you get a restraining order, they'll issue a 3rd strike against her. She'll be off the streets for a while, so you and yours won't have to worry. Thanks for the help, I said. Always. Oh, and Ben? I hope you didn't eat any of those truffles. I know firefighters don't do anything except get fat at the station. Have a good night. Grace, Anna and I were at the aquarium. We walked through the lobby and made our way to the main hall with changing ecosystems. We passed an artificial estuary filled with stingrays. Makeshift habitats with invertebrates, amphibians and reptiles were everywhere. Anna, cradled in my arms, seemed to love the river otters the most. She giggled at them as we strolled by. We marveled at a variety of sunfish. For a few minutes, my mind was off getting the paperwork ready for the restraining order. I had not even explained the situation to my wife yet. Grace wanted to be a marine biologist when we first met as teenagers. I liked how the trips to the aquarium brought out her younger self. No matter how many times we came here, her eyes lit up with wonderment at the ocean life. It was a deep-seated appreciation for the environment she made a point of bestowing on Anna. We stopped and marveled at a tiger shark. It was at least 18 feet long in its 500-gallon tank. I overheard a tourist read from a Google search and say how the predator had 24 upper and lower teeth. Each one was sharper than a saw blade. Its jaw could apply 6,000 pounds of pressure on who or whatever it clamped down on. I need to use the bathroom, Grace told me. I'll swing by the gift shop after and get some Gatorade. I'm parched. Stay here, okay? We won't go anywhere, I said as I kissed Anna on the forehead and lifted her hand to wave at her mother. We waited for 10 minutes. I pulled out my phone and texted her. Another 5 minutes passed without a response. I sent another few quick messages, with nothing in return. Worry filled me as I looked around for Grace. I felt a hot breath on the back of my neck. I turned around and saw Vivian. She wore rubbery-looking overalls. A blue undershirt with the aquarium's business logo was visible. A name badge attached to a lanyard was around her neck. When I squinted at it, I saw it was credentials with someone else's name on it. She had somehow stolen it from another employee and used it to get by security. Master keys dangled from her belt. "You shouldn't be near me," I said as I felt a lump form in the back of my throat. The words came out louder than I had realized. A few people stopped and stared. "Who did you steal from to impersonate a worker here? Get away from me and my kid right now, you psycho." "Oh, hush. We're meant to be together. The inconvenient circumstances which stop you from being with me are about to fade away. You'll thank me, Ben. We're going to be so happy together. All you needed was a push in the right direction." A cutting of old habits. There's no place in our future for an unnecessary second woman. You might want to look behind you. The big boy is about to eat. An Aquarius' favorite part of the day is feeding time. Vivian laughed as she pointed at the glass. I will never forget the way she cackled. I turned around and saw Grace. My wife was inside of the tank. She floated at peace. Inert. Those once pristine emerald eyes were empty. The tiger shark bit her arm off. Streaks of crimson filled the water. End.